Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. This is the Christmas special of Gibbo's Corner. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined as always by John Gibson, and we're going to bring some festive cheer in what has been a very turbulent year off the pitch in society. But we're not going to focus on that, no. We're going to focus on Christmas and the festive period, the calendar, which football fans always look forward to, and that run of games back in the old days in the snow.
Yeah, often, very often.
More recently, not. John, you've gone through and you've picked some fixtures, as you described to me, mostly games that ended on a high for Newcastle, some that didn't.
Yeah.
But just before we get started, what does the festive calendar in terms of football fixtures mean to you as a supporter and a journalist?
Oh, always been a wonderful, wonderful time of year, and I think it is for so many Newcastle fans. It's extra special, isn't it? You stuff yourself full of turkey and roast potatoes now, and then you've got it, and the boredom of playing games with the family or listening to the traditional stuff on telly, and you want to get out, whether it's Boxing Day, you want to get out and enjoy the football, and it has more of a tingle, and there's that feeling on the terraces, and the game I was going to start with was none more so than that, remembering it. It was going back to 1974, and that was the only season, you might remember, where Carlisle United, of all clubs, were in the top flight of English football. They only spent the one season up in the top flight. It was season 1974. So a derby match at the Christmas time with Newcastle United at Carlisle, Brunton Park, an old type football ground with all the atmosphere that has. All the Newcastle fans through the Tyne Valley up to Carlisle, thousands of them going up for a game. And there was extra excitement to the whole game because Newcastle had just signed 2 new players, and you know how they're always welcomed by the fans. We just signed Tommy Craig and Jeff Nullty, and they'd had, just a couple of days beforehand, they'd had the medicals on a match day when we were playing Leeds United down at St James's Park, which was a fixture before Leeds disappeared off the calendar in recent years, which always seemed to be the Newcastle Christmas games against Leeds. We played Leeds at home. Both the boys went to St James's Park, had their medicals, got the medicals completed with half an hour of the Leeds game to go, watched Newcastle, and then watched Newcastle play Leeds, and then they travelled up to Brunton Park. And Tommy Craig was a wonderful player. He didn't have any pace. Didn't get round the park, but he had the most wonderful left foot. Was a real creator, and he ran the show that day at Carlisle. He was absolutely terrific. Memorable debut. The goals were, as they always were at that time, Tudor and Supermac got the goals, and Supermax was a typical rumbustious run through and finish, as he always did. But the performance was Tommy Craig.
Obviously, we always talk about Supermac and the strikers that went before him, the great strikers that came after him. But John Tudor, he didn't often know where the net was.
Underrated, very underrated, but not by Malcolm MacDonald, who always said he was the best at Newcastle, better than Alan Gowling, who he played with in '76. And Newcastle fans, he was nicknamed King Tudor for obvious reasons. A brave finisher, wonderful in the air, brave finisher, scored a lot of goals. If he was in the side today, he'd be a superstar in his own right. But when you're playing at the shoulder of Malcolm MacDonald, you are the number 2 striker. There's absolutely no question. It was like if you played at the shoulder of Shearer, there was only one number 1. But Tudor was quite exceptional. And Supermac always said, yeah, I'm the glory man, the man that gets all the headlines, but I'm only as good as the guy that feeds me. And ask Callum Wilson today, he would say exactly the same. I need feeding. You make the bullets and I'll fire them. And it used to be Terry Hibbett at Newcastle for Supermac. It then became Tommy Craig after that. And Tommy was the nicest lad you could wish to meet. He went on, as you probably realise, to skip a Newcastle at Wembley in the League Cup final of '76. But that was only because Jeff Nulty, who signed from him on the same day, was injured. And Jeff was his big mate. They roomed together whenever Newcastle played away. And Nulty, we went up to Bolton in the FA Cup just before Wembley, and Nulty went up for a corner, and Barry Siddle, who was the old Sunderland goalkeeper who was in goal, went to punch the ball and just went straight through it and punched Nulty flush on the jaw, smashed it into about 600 pieces. I think he had his Sunday lunch through a straw that weekend, and there was no way he was going to make the cup final, so Tommy Craig actually went out and skipped us at Wembley. It was a shame for Tommy, because one of the nicest lads you could wish to meet, but he got caught up tremendously in the politics of St James's Park. The politics that came after the '74 FA Cup final around '76. The politics that were sparked by Gordon Lee coming as manager, and then when Lee left, Dickie Dennis. Newcastle as a camp, which had all been together during the Joe Harvey years, split hugely in the dressing room when Lee was there, and certainly when the players propelled Dickie Dennis into the job. There was the pro-Lee clique of the Gowling and Mickey Burns and a few of the others, and Tommy got sucked into that, and there was the other brigade, which was Supermac and the old school. And he got sucked into that to such an extent he was uncomfortable with it that he actually left Newcastle and went off to Aston Villa. And he said that Tommy always said how much he regretted that move. It didn't work out for him. He come back as a coach and had 8 more years here as a coach to various managers. And he always said that he wished he hadn't left the club, and that while Glasgow Celtic were always his club in Scotland, and he worked for them on the coaching side later, his English club was always Newcastle United, not Sheffield Wednesday, not Aston Villa, other clubs he played for. Lovely, lovely man. But they always say if you can get off to a rousing start with the Newcastle fans, you're well made. Well, then go out at Christmas, have a debut relatively close to home at Carlisle, absolutely run the show from top to bottom. You're made with the fans after that. And Tommy was, and bless him, he deserved it. He was quality.
Not a bad start to life on Tyneside. To those watching on YouTube, you'll be admiring my festive jumper. John didn't quite get the memo, but we've got tinsel to go with it on the table. Just please remember to like and subscribe, and thumbs up in the comments as well. To those listening, as usual on our podcast, thank you very much, and we wish you all a Merry Christmas.
Absolutely.
Before your next game, John, I just want to ask what it's like covering Boxing Day for you, because you always mention in the podcast that you are someone who likes to be social, so I imagine Christmas Day is quite a social occasion around your house. So as a journalist, back in the day, in your heyday, when you knew you maybe had to travel God knows where, what was that like, getting that balance right?
Well, I worked on it an awful lot over the years, and it got better as time went on. I've always been a social animal, so it was never too much of a problem, because I was always able, with about a couple hours sleep, to be on top form the next day. Mind, by it got to about December the 28th, I crashed out for a couple of days. But no, in those days, when you go back to the 70s and 80s, it was a very different culture to now. Football, probably wrongly so, was in a huge culture of drinkers. There was absolutely no question of that. And you went through everybody from George Best in the old days right away through to Tony Adams, a lot of the people at Newcastle United. Malcolm MacDonald in his day could sup for England as well as score goals for England. And it was part of life. I think life was very different in those days. And I think a lot of the top players played hard and worked hard, and the two seemed to go hand in hand. And it worked with the fans, because the players were so much more part of the fans' life. they mix together in nightclubs, they mix together in pubs. It's a bit different today. There's not quite that social intermingling as there was then. And I must admit that I'm biased. I thought it was a very, very good time to be around Newcastle United, because you could be pals with the people, and the fans had ready access, almost nightly to all the Newcastle players. So it was a great time. It was a great time.
The second game you're going to cover, though, goes back beyond your journalist days. 1955.
1955, still a fan there, still going to watch Newcastle play at Anti-Graces on the little postage stamp television. Before that, a match that even me at my ancient time, I've got it down here, would love to have seen before we go to 55, not mentioning it in passing. 1933, even I, which will surprise you, Andrew, wasn't alive then. But the reason that would have been nice, can you imagine this? On Boxing Day, Newcastle went to Everton and won 7-3 at Everton. And on New Year's Day, following it, Liverpool, another Scousing side, come to St James's Park and Newcastle won 9-2. Now, can you imagine winning 7-3 at Everton on one day, and then on the New Year you celebrate 9-3 with Liverpool? That must have been quite a time.
I don't know if Newcastle even scored that many goals this season.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think they probably have as they did in those 2 goals.
Sorry, Steve.
Those 2 games. I mean, they let in 5 goals in those 2 games, but they scored 7 and 9 against Everton and Liverpool, which was quite something. But going back to 55, one of the things that I actually adore about this is it was a very unusual Christmas. We played back-to-back. We played Christmas Day and Boxing Day, and there were derbies with Sunderland, and we won them both. Now, can you think of a better Christmas if you're a Geordie than we'll play the Mackems twice in 2 days and take maximum points? And it started off at Roker Park, where Newcastle played Sunderland, and the result was Sunderland won, Newcastle 6. And then the day after we played at St James's Park and won 3-1. Now that, it doesn't get any better than that. The first game, the winning of the 6-1 was quite amazing. I've got the facts down here, because Sunderland at that time were doing exceptionally well in the league, which made it even more staggering. They weren't far behind the famous Busby Babes, Manchester United, the Busby Babes before Munich, bless them. They weren't far behind them. They were in 6th place, but only 4 points behind Manchester United, and they had 2 games in hand. So they were really in big time. And Len Shackleton, the Clown Prince of Soccer, that played at Newcastle, scored 6 on his debut against Newport, was due back in the Sunderland side, so they were quite buoyant. This was going to be, a result that was going to do them, the world of good for getting up there. What we've got to remember, this was 1955, and Newcastle were no slouches because they'd won the Cup 51, 52, and they were going on that season to win it. Sorry, that season they'd already won it in 55, the FA Cup. So the match down there, wait a minute, now who got the goals? Here we are, Jackie Milburn, what a surprise, Vic Keeble and Bill Curry, who were 3 centre forwards actually, scored 2 apiece. And they were absolutely humiliated, Sunderland. We were, glory be, we've got a game the next day. Incredibly, with such a short turnaround, Sunderland went out and bought a centre forward before the return game at Christmas.
There's a lot of things that stand out there. We'll get onto that there about the transfer coming in, but also just the fact that they played one game and then literally the day after they played another game. I mean, players these days complain about the quick turnaround in 2 or 3 days.
Absolutely. The only concession that was made is that it was Sunderland, so neither side had to travel too far. But nonetheless, playing back-to-back like that, and when you think it meant you didn't have to travel, but didn't it obviously crank up the games? It was 2 derbies, for goodness sake. It wasn't just playing whoever, like Carlisle when they were.
I guess, given on the return game, given you've just been thumped 6-1, you are going for the title. That, some might say, gives the added advantage to Sunderland because they're going to want blood, they're going to want vengeance, and it's an interesting dynamic because usually a derby defeat will be allowed to fester within for weeks, months before the return game, even years, as we are now, given Sunderland's predicament. But there you've got literally a day or so, and so the want for revenge is going to be absolutely burning.
From Sunderland's point of view, they can wipe out the memory of the 6-1 almost immediately if they get a result at St James's Park. From Newcastle's point of view, they haven't even had time to celebrate a 6-1 and savour it before they're playing them again. And for Sunderland to come up out of the blue and sign a centre forward, the glamour position, it was an England B international called Bill Holden that had signed for Sunderland, and they arrive at St James's Park with Holden to make his debut. And what's more, he made an immediate impact by scoring and putting Sunderland ahead. So all of a sudden, the whole dynamic of the 6-1s changed. Apart from the fact that in the second half, Newcastle came back with goals from Keeble, Milburn and Len White. Again, 3 centre forwards, as we know them, and 3 very different players. Milburn was Wojaki, end of conversation. Everybody knows all about him. Len White was always said, he was dinky, a small guy, a bit like Aguero, stocky and not too tall. But all the fans of that era will tell you he was the best centre forward never to get an England cap. He played for the Football League, which was in those days the Football League, Scottish League, Irish League, played inter-league matches, and he played for the Football League and scored a hat-trick for the Football League, but never got in the England side. And Keeble was totally the other way. He was nicknamed the Camel because he ran as if he had a hump on his back or a sack of coals, because he was stooping. His ability on the floor, bless him, and he became a very good friend of mine and was the last of the 50s players to die when he died not so long ago. But his feet were just made for standing on, not for kicking a football. But in the air, he was the best you'd ever seen.
You mentioned there, neither side had to travel very far. Wouldn't it be nice, well, in my opinion, I don't know about yourself, but wouldn't it be nice that Newcastle United fans didn't have to always travel away on Boxing Day, which has tended to be the rule in recent years? It would be nice if they could just be given their nearest, their nearest team, which at the moment would be, I think, Leeds or Burnley.
Yes,
very close.
Probably the Leeds was the traditional game we got.
So, I mean, it would be nice that they don't have to travel all the way down to Manchester or wherever.
Yeah.
I forget who they've got. I think they've got Man City. Am I right about that? I think they've got Man City on Boxing Day.
That's something to celebrate, yes.
8 p.m. kickoff. So that's a late one. I mean, they'll not be there because of the COVID and such, but if it wasn't for the restrictions, they'd be down there. That's a long way to travel on Boxing Day and the trains and what have you. It would be nice, wouldn't it, if the FA, the Premier League, just said, you know what, we'll make sure everyone plays everyone in a close proximity.
I mean, we often in the old days got Sunderland or Leeds. Of course, what a shame, we've missed them in recent years as they've both gone down. I mean, Leeds did a Sunderland, I think, went down to the 3rd tier at one stage. Leeds are back with us this season, but Sunderland aren't, and we don't know yet when they will be back up. But I hope it's soon, because it's we are owed 6 points per season.
I miss the
from
derbies.
Sunderland. I miss the derbies, but I didn't miss them when they ended because we'd lost about 4 on the trot or something, Andrew, when they ended with Sunderland going down. But I mean, just think of that as a Christmas present. Newcastle v Sunderland, Newcastle 9, Sunderland 2 over 2 days.
That'd stay with you, wouldn't it?
I mean, that is a decent old time. But Sunderland, as I say, had a good side at that time. They were right up challenging the Busby Babes. But Newcastle were a side that could lift the game at that stage. You know, they'd had the 3 years, 3 cup wins in 5 years. They had the exceptional players. We were just coming to the end of their glory time and of Milburn's glory time with the mid-50s. But special times. Was
that Jackie Milburn's last derby, or did he have a couple more in him?
I think he played after that, but not by the time we got the 55 Cup final, that was almost his swan song of him and his pomp. Because if you remember, the manager in 55 actually tried to drop him for the final, down Livingston, which was an absolute disaster. But that was just about him ready to say goodbye, and he did the unusual thing and went over to Linfield in Northern Ireland. These days, nobody goes from a top player in England over to Northern Ireland, but he didn't want to play for another club in England. He was a Newcastle United man, so that suited him fine. Unbelievably, and this would be a quiz question, if I said to you, did Jackie Milburn ever play in the Champions League now, the European Cup, and you would say no, because Newcastle never did then. But the answer is yes, he played in the European Cup with Linfield.
Well, there you have it. That's where you're going to get that answer from, should you ever be asked it. Just quickly back to those watching on YouTube, if you look above John's head, you can see our logo. And do you know what? I'm quite impressed with it. It was designed by our graphic designer, Doug Young. We're here in the lane heading right, and he also designed the logo for that. And I think, Gibbo, you're quite happy with your logo, aren't you?
I think it's good. I think I was thinking of trying to hold that in front of my face because it would be easier for the punters to listen to and watch. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great. Now I'm a bit like Johnson in AC/DC. I can't take my cap off because that's a Gibbo corner. So.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. And just a side tangent, my father actually went out last week and bought a semi-identical hat to the one you're wearing. So he's either modelling himself. He's just put it on there. He's either modelling himself on yourself or Brian Johnson. We'll leave that up to debate.
Well, I know who I would like it to be, but there's nothing wrong with Jono. He's a top man, a top Geordie, and a Newcastle United fan.
Let's get on to the next game, and it's another one against Sunderland, 1967.
It is, and the difference for me in 55, I was a fan. Still at school and starry-eyed about Warjackie, my superhero. By the time this one came along, I was actually in the press box at Walker Park for the game. And what I loved about it, it was a comeback. It was the great comeback. It was Sunderland 3, Newcastle 3. And you would say, well, is that a great memory? Well, yes, as it turned out, it was, because we were 3-1 down, believe it or not, with only 20 minutes to go. And it looked pretty well nailed on to be a bad time. And I always remember I was in the front row of the press box at the old Walker Park. And right down beneath us is a paddock, which was absolutely packed with Sunderland fans. And naturally they could spot me in the front row on the phone because you were live in those days to the Pink doing a running report all day, and they could see me on the phone. And of course they all turned round and taunted me, you know, the Geordie, and give me dog's abuse. And I just kept going. We had scored a penalty through Ollie Burton, and we got back in the game when we got a second penalty, and Ollie Burton kept his nerve. Second penalties are much more difficult than the first penalty because where do you put them? Is the goalkeeper going to guess, etc., etc. But we got back to 3-2. Now we were throwing everything at them, and they decided they had to batten down the hatches and weather it out. They'd won the game. Now they got a warning at what was coming their way because we got a corner, and naturally in those days all the Sunderland defence wears Wyn Davies. Wonderful header of the ball, a bit like Vic Keeble. His strength was in the air, not so good on the deck, so they were looking for Wyn Davies. Big Nat McNamee went up for the corner. Over it came. He cleared out the whole penalty area, and everybody else just ran completely through them. Had a heck of an effort just wide. Danger avoided. Relief from Sunderland's point of view. But still to come was another corner. And this time, when the ball come, McNamee was left unmarked. Again, everybody was cluttered round Davies. The same thing happened, just thinking of in the 55 Cup final against Man City. Everybody talking about how good Vic Gibbo was. All the Man City players scored in 40-odd seconds, went round Vic Gibbo. Jackie Milburn left on his own, headed the goal in. And it was more or less the same here. Everybody was round Wyn Davies. McNamee comes in. He looked like Desperate Dan. I mean, he looked as if he could twist crowbars in his teeth. He was absolutely fearsome. And he come powering in at full pelt, headed the ball into net. His impetus took him further on, and he swung off the crossbar, 2 hands off the crossbar, looking like the drunken sailor on the rigging, and it was, all our fans were behind that goal at the full will end, and the whole place erupted. And I'm on the phone back to the Pink, but I covered up the mouthpiece and just said to the Sunderland fans who'd been baiting me, all right, boys, everything okay? And boom, end of the game, 3-3. I'm then immediately stay on the line and I'm doing a report for the Sunday Sun. That's the way it worked in those days. And as I'm doing the report, everybody filed out of the paddock, all the Sunderland fans. And when they'd all left, there was 2 guys, I'm still on the phone, there was 2 guys left in the paddock. And they turned round, faced me, put their thumbs up, unzipped their top, and underneath they had a black and white striped shirts on. They'd zipped up because they had to go in the paddock with all the Sunderland fans, but they unzipped their black and white striped shirt. You all right, Gibbo? Wonderful, wonderful moments. And really, that was John McNamee at his very best. And he lived on that reputation of being a hard man, that basically because he was. He'd had to get out of Scotland because the Scottish referees, he would have ended up being banned signed. The Scottish referees had his number and were looking for him and were nailing him. I mean, he actually got done by the referees for slapping his own goalkeeper, who said something, they were disputing who should have cleared this cross, McNamee or the keeper, and John chinned his own keeper. That was him. He had huge amount of run-ins. Whenever we played Leeds, used to put McNamee in the Newcastle side for his battles with Big Jack Charlton. You can imagine how thunderous they were, because Jack didn't give an inch, and neither did McNamee.
And I bet Jack respected that as well. I bet Jack respected someone who gave him a good hiding.
Totally. And they respected each other because they saw it as a man's game and they played that way. And they respected each other. I always remember, George Best was the best, aptly named. And he could skin anybody. He had the ability, when he was in his pump at Manchester United, not sadly once he was on the slippery slope. And I always remember he played against Newcastle and he went shimmying past McNamee twice. And as he did with other people. And when he come past him again, having done the run and had his shot, McNamee said to him, hey, George, he said, if you want to walk home on your legs, don't ever do that anywhere near me again. So even George, who could skin anybody, decided to go and play on the other side of the pitch because it was much easier. And that was McNamee. His reputation was absolutely fearsome. Heart the size of a frying pan, and did a terrific job for Newcastle. He was bought by Joe Harvey when the one time Joe might have gone down, Joe had a record of X number of years at Newcastle. No minuses. Everything was winning. He had one season when it looked as if he might go down, and he gambled hugely. He sold Newcastle's best player, who was Alan Suddock, the local boy, genius, clever. Well, sold him for 60 grand, which was decent money in those days, and bought 3 players for that 60 grand, which was McNamee, Tommy Robson, who just died recently, bless him, and Dave Elliott. And that courage in doing that kept Newcastle up that season, and within a couple of years they'd qualified for Europe through the Fez Cup. and won it, of course. And McNamee come to Newcastle as part of that.
Just before we get on to the next game, you mentioned there you calling up and giving your match report. Just for our younger listeners, do you want to just explain a bit about what was going on there? Because obviously today we're on laptops and we send it back over the internet, and that it's still print-wise that way. But just briefly, just explain what you mean by you were calling up and giving your report over the phone.
Yeah, it was very, very different in those days to the way it is now. New technology didn't exist. The laptops and didn't exist at all. And we had the Football Pink came out because there wasn't instant stuff. There wasn't local radio where you could listen to the match, every match that Newcastle United played. Television didn't cover every game. It covered the match of the day games, etc. And maybe Time Tees would have a camera in because it was a derby match, but they didn't cover everything. So we produced. I went on the phone at 2:45 before match to give them the intro and the teams, and I never went off the phone again till half time and went on to begin the second half, and never wrote a word, just ad-libbed into the phone. There was a guy in the office with a pair of earphones on a typewriter. That's how quick he had to be at taking it down, and he took down, the way I'm speaking now, my stuff, which was then given to the subs to sub and put in the paper. And the amazing thing, and I've mentioned this before, is that Leeds United, at that time, were the best side in the country. They won the championship around the time we won the European Fairs Cup. They won the First Division Championship. It was the Don Revie era with Big Jack and all the wonderful players, Johnny Giles, Billy Bremner, Alan Clark, the centre forward, all the great players, Lorimer. But they didn't have any phones in the press box. Can you believe they were the champions of England? They didn't have any phones in the press box. So I had to actually write my match report out longhand, give it to a little lad who was getting sixpence for running copy on his day off, who rushed downstairs into the press box onto an open line phone and read my stuff out to the office, come up. I had the next sheet ready by then. It was an absolute nightmare. When the fixtures come out, the first thing I did was look for when we played Leeds and hope we're playing them on a Wednesday night. Because if it was a Saturday, I had the Pink to take care of.
That just sounds absolutely different bizarre.
And as I say, at the final whistle, having done all that for a Pink, I went straight into a report for the Sunday Sun, which is what I was doing when the Newcastle fans showed their hand at Roker Park. But great fun, and there was some excitement of flying by the seat of your pants. You know, there was something daredevil about it. Wasn't all going to go pear-shaped where you're going to manage it. It had a touch of excitement about it, and loved every minute of it. Loved every minute.
It's very different today, although, I mean, you talk about the lack of resources there at Leeds. I mean, the Wi-Fi at Newcastle United and other grounds leave a lot to be desired, because it's not always easy to get a connection sometimes, which can definitely obstruct you in your writing duties, although there's not always a lot of positive things to write about. But moving on to the next game, we have Middlesbrough, so another local derby. With 1964-65 season. What stands out about that one?
Well, first and foremost, that was the season when Joe Harvey won the Second Division Championship, the title, with the first of the three sides he built. He built that side, the 69 Fairs Cup side, and the 74 FA Cup final side. This was his first side, and Newcastle had been in the depths of despair. They're far a lot worse off than they are now when Joe came to the club, and he had rebuilt them absolutely ruthlessly. And on Boxing Day of that year, on the way to the title, we won 2-0 at Borough with Dave Hilly scoring and Nurse own goal. He was a central defender there. And on the 28th of December in the return, up here, we beat Borough 2-1 and Hilly scored both the goals. 54,750. You know, we think of Newcastle today with 50,000. Wonderful. They were getting gates then in exactly the same. This was for a second division derby as well, we've got to remember, against Middlesbrough. 54,000. And The interesting thing was Dave Hilly scored down there on Boxing Day, and he scored in the return. And what was exceptional about that was Dave Hilly was really a creator. He was what you would call, or you used to call in those days, a tanner ball player. Now that sounds insulting, but it wasn't. It meant you had so much movement you could play on a tanner. You had the quick shimmy, you could get away from somebody on a tanner, a sixpence as it was in those days. And Dave Hilly, who was a high strutter, lifted his feet high. He seemed to glide over the top. He never ran in mud. Everybody else was up to his ankles in mud. He tiptoed over the top of the surface. Looked a delicate player, wonderful player, creative player. And he actually finished that season second top goal scorer to Ron McGarry, the famous have goals will travel, Ron McGarry. And he must have made, Dave, as many goals as he scored for Newcastle. Wonderful guy. When it was all over, his playing career, he came back and lived in Newcastle and became a school teacher. And a lot of Newcastle fans reminisce about him at John Morley School in Newcastle. Oh, he was our PE teacher, what a great guy. Took them for football and of course mesmerised them, whatever age he was, with his ability, because his natural ability, his legs went, but his natural ability to control the ball never left him. And still now, and he's a fair old age now, is our David, but he's still living up in Gosforth and is still with us and is still instantly recognisable. He kept himself very fit, instantly recognisable from the guy he was with us. And he'd made his name with Third Lanark, where Bobby Mitchell come from, a club that's now well defunct in Scotland. And he went on, after he left Newcastle, he went to Nottingham Forest. And he was just there for a season, and he loved to recall with me that season with Forest, because Slim Jim, who was Jim Baxter, who had come down, made his name in Glasgow Rangers, an absolute hero to Rangers fans in Scotland. And by the way, when we talked about people at Christmas time liking to celebrate, nobody celebrated like Jim Baxter, mine. But his Christmas was every day. He celebrated every day. There was more liquid inside Jim than there is flowing down the Tyne. He was one of the legendary drinkers of all time, and a legendary player who rather blew up a little bit early, and it might have had something to do with the vast quantities of hard liquor that the lad managed to take aboard. And when he signed, he was now well past his best. He was past his best when he was at Sunderland. His best was at Rangers. But Dave Hilly, I always remember telling me that the chairman of Forest was a bloke called Tony Wood, and he wanted to revive Forest by signing a superstar personality to give to the crowd. And he was so determined to do that on his watch that he was going to pay the transfer fee out his own pocket, which was £100,000, which in those days was a fair amount of dough. And so he wanted a personality, and he decided Jim Baxter would be the lad. Slim Jim, the guy that destroyed England at Wembley, etc., etc. Now, John Carey, his manager, who was the famous player out of Man U, didn't want anything to do with Slim Jim at all, because he knew that the baggage he was going to take on with Jim Baxter, you had to put a truck on the back of Jim Baxter's car for him to put all the baggage in that he was bringing with him, because he was that sort of player. But anyway, he was signed, and Baxter got £4,000 in his own back pocket for signing on, top wages, and was put up in it to live in a luxury hotel, Fatal, with a bar downstairs, room service, and a nightclub just up the street. Dave Hilly, who had just joined Forest, was in a boarding house. Now, Dave Hilly was a jock, Baxter was a jock, so they naturally bonded straight away down there. And Jim Baxter went in and saw the chairman and said, "Hey, my mate, Hilly, in a boarding house, this is ridiculous." And he got him moved into this luxury hotel in the street, in the room next to Bax. Now, as far as the club was concerned, Hilly's job was to ride shotgun on Baxter and keep him out of trouble. And as far as Baxter concerned, he was a mate to get into trouble with. So it was an eventful time down there for Dave, because, as he put it, Jim was a party animal, was the way he put it. And he used to say, Tommy Kavanagh, the Forest coach, who, if you remember, it was a Man United coach to Tommy Dock, and if you remember, was up at Newcastle for a short while as a coach. He used to try to run past the players in the morning when they were doing a lap of the track before training, and he got knocked out by Jim Baxter's breath, breathing on him because the bottle of whiskey was still in the boot of the car, the empty bottle. But smashing times, a good player, Dave Hilly. He's gone down on record as Joe Harvey's first signing for Newcastle, and bearing in mind how epic Harvey's signings were for Newcastle, that's not a bad accolade, and it's technically true. But as Dave told me himself, it wasn't really, because when Joe came, his transfer was already in the pipeline. Stan Seymour, who was a wonderful record of going into Scotland and getting all the great players, Bobby Mitchell, Frank Brennan, everybody you can think of, had already done the deal for Hilly. Harvey was through the door, went as his first sign, but he was actually signed by Stan Seymour. But he's remained a friend to today, Dave Hilly, and underestimated in Newcastle's history, but not by people that actually saw him.
Before we go into the next game, which is the one I'm most interested in, let's just talk about how the weather kind of affected the Christmas and Boxing Day schedule, because as we mentioned right at the start there, we're lucky if we see snow in December, and especially not to the high heights as it was during the 60s and 70s. How did the weather affect the games? Because I can imagine some of the pitches being in absolute horrible condition.
Oh, I mean, absolutely ludicrous. Newcastle generally at that time tried all sorts of things to get games on. First and foremost, the players were always involved in the physical part of clearing St James's Park. All the players would go down and they would have to clear sometimes as much as 4 feet of snow off St James's and stick it round the ground on the track. And that took a heck of a lot of doing. And of course left a little bit of snow on the pitch, which turned ice overnight. Newcastle then come up with ingenious other ways of trying to get the games on. They put a lot of burners on the pitch at one stage to melt the snow, which tend to flood the pitch. And then the rest of the time, when the wingers run down the wing with the ball and got tackled and fell over, his knees were absolutely ripped to piece by all this coke that was on the pitch from the burners, sort of thing. So, I mean, that didn't work. At one time, Charlie Mitten decided that putting cellophane wraps over the pitch, clearing the pitch, putting this wrap on so that any more snow would fall on top of it, or would protect it and keep it warm underneath. And Bob Moncur and that were the young lads at the time at St James's Park, had to clear the pitch and then put these cellophane down and put little rocks on the corner to hold it down. And so they come in the next morning and all this had blown off the pitch and was on the roof of the houses around St James's Park, dangling from the roof. And of course, one of the times when Newcastle played in the snow was when Len Shack was there. He was fleetingly with us before he went down to Sunderland and become a legend at Sunderland. But was famous when he played with us because he scored 6 goals on his home debut. Can you imagine that? We talk about what McQuinn did with 4 in a division down. He scored 6 on his debut. Newcastle's greatest win, they scored 13 against Newport County, which isn't the sort of game like Newcastle have just played Newport County, where one's in the top flight and the other's in the bottom division. They were in the same division, playing a league game. And he scored 6. He was Jackie, when he first signed just after the war, he was Jackie Milburn's apprentice down the pit nationally, because they had to go down the pit so that they didn't get called up. And Jackie had a motorbike, and Shaq used to get on the back and he used to drive down to training from the pit on a Tuesday and Thursday to train at St James Park, stash the bike round the back because they weren't supposed to be on a bike, and train. Anyway, they cleared the pitch this day totally, and there was about 4 foot of snow all the way around the track at St James's Park. Newcastle were winning 1-0 in the last 10 minutes. So, and Shaq loved games, loved tricks, loved the audacity of football. Football was a challenge to him to do something different. So every time Shaq got the ball, because they didn't have ball boys in those days, every time Shaq got the ball, he flicked it with the outside of his foot over the 4 foot wall of snow. So it was a throw in to the other team, but the player had to clamber over the 4 foot wall to get the ball, clamber back over to take the throw in. And the refs in those days didn't bother to stop the watch and put extra time on. So every time the ball came to Shaq, he didn't try to find a man. He flicked the ball over the wall. And I reckon he must have got rid of about 8 minutes of the 10 minutes were left doing that. That was the sort of guy he was. But there was...
Tactic.
In those days, the fans just went and stood in the snow, and they played in the most atrocious of conditions. But the whole of football was like that, Andrew. I mean, by the time you got through the early months of a season, like August and September, it was either a mud bath with mud round your ankles, and you're trying to kick a heavy football in that. Or it was frozen and rutted where you would turn an ankle, or it had 3 foot of snow on it. They didn't play on the billiard pitches that they play now.
I think everyone remembers the picture of Joe Harvey clearing the snow. That was in the big freeze of, I think, the 63, 64 season. So that was a bit March, April. So a few months after the Christmas schedule. But just briefly on that picture, it's amazing to think that you've mentioned the players clearing the pitch, but the manager as well with a shovel.
Totally. Oh, totally.
Amazing.
That was their job, and that was part of their training. They cleared the pitch. And it wasn't just the apprentices. As I say, the manager and the top stars of the day were out on the pitch in wellies and bobble hats with huge shovels, shoveling snow off a pitch. And I tell you what, when you think of the acreage of a pitch, and if there's about 3 foot of snow on it, it takes some moving. It takes some moving. And, talking about that period, I'd also like to mention, because we were just on about, Newcastle beating Borough twice in the promotion team when Hilly scored the goals, etc. That side was built on a half-back line, as it was called in those days, of Anderson, McGrath and Eiley. And the whole side was built on that. And everything about it was wrong, but turned out brilliantly right. Anderson and Eiley couldn't stand each other. Could not stand each other. Ended up wouldn't talk to each other. So McGrath in the middle, who was a complete comedian, one of the greatest early after-dinner speakers I've ever heard because he was funny, he was the go-between between Eiley and Anderson. Now, I said to Stan afterwards, what was all that about? And when I got to know him later in years, and how did it come about? He said, well, Jim had been captain of Newcastle United. I arrived from Sunderland, where I'd been a legend, 400, 500 games, couple of England caps. Mackems adored him. They bring him in, Eiley's stripped of the captaincy and it's given to Anderson. Jim didn't take too well to that. They were both also attacking halfbacks, where you want one sitting and one going. They both went, when they first came, ignored each other and both went. They worked out a system where one stayed and one went. If one went, the other dropped in. But they didn't talk to each other at all. But McGrath, who was a wonderful, wonderful player, was the go-between two of them. And I got on terrific with McGrath. And afterwards, I helped him negotiate when he went to Preston and a couple of other clubs. And I helped him get Newcastle kids who weren't going to make it at Newcastle. I was reporting on Newcastle at the time. McGrath would phone me up and say, Gibbo, who's playing well up there? And I'd say, go and watch him. And he'd have him. I used to tap him. Jeff Wrightson, who played centre half, I got him for McGrath. Ian Bogie, who was a wonderful. I'd always been said was going to be the second Paul Gascoigne. Isn't it awful when you're going to be the second somebody, the second George Best? No, you're not. That's too much of a burden. But he bought him as well. But Anderson was intriguing because he'd been so adored at Sunderland that you really felt he's got no chance of Newcastle. He's a Sunderland legend. He come to Newcastle, he only played 2 seasons here. When he signed for Newcastle, his wife burst into tears and his dad stopped speaking to him for 5 weeks. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's just at home. That's without the fans of Sunderland calling you a traitor and of Newcastle saying, what's this Mackham doing coming here? That was his wife and his dad. But yet, by the first 4 months of gone of him being here, his dad was best friends with Joe Harvey, and Stan Anderson says the best 2 years of his playing career, and he captained Newcastle, Sunderland and Middlesbrough. How many players have done that? He captained all 3 top Northeast clubs. He said that the best 2 years of his playing career was at Newcastle, and by far the best manager he had was Joe Harvey. And he fell out with Alan Brown, who was at Sunderland. He went down to Middlesbrough, and the famous Rach Carter was manager. A grave disappointment, he called him. And I asked him, I said, well, Ando, what is it about Joe Harvey that makes him such a good manager? He said, I'll tell you. He said, we were playing at Cardiff, he said, and Joe come in, they were getting beat. Joe come in at half time, and Joe was very volatile when in that situation. And he said he'd come in and he started murdering young Pop Robson. And Stan was captain, and he piped up, hey, wait a minute, boss, this is a young lad. It's not just Pop having a bad game. Have a go at us experienced players. Joe bit back, game over, got on a train from Cardiff to London, and then a train from London to Newcastle. That was some journey, wasn't it? And Joe tried to speak to Stan. Stan wouldn't have it, because Stan, bless him, could sulk. He could sulk for England to start with. So he sat in icy silence all the way home. Wouldn't speak to Joe. Went in on the Monday morning. Jimmy Green, off the trainers there, goes over to Stan, says, Stan, the boss wants you in his office. And Stan said to me, he said, I thought, oh dear me, here we go, Joe's going to blister me for what happened down there. He said, and I went in, and Joe said, how you doing, mate? And I said, look, he said, pull up a chair. He said, we'll have a pot of tea. He ordered a pot of tea. How's the missus? The kids off to school all right? What do you think? Were you going to have a game of golf this weekend? So he talked to me about everything bar football. He said, and what he was actually saying was, look, football's a passionate game. We'll have our misunderstanding, but it doesn't matter. He says, and Joe was one of the cleverest managers at diffusing a situation. He said, and he never held a grudge. He would have a pop at you, but he would never hold a grudge. And the wonderful thing is, we had a great bunch of kids growing up at that time. Craig, Clark, Moncur, Pop Robson, who all went on and were stars when we won the only European trophy. And they all talk about the influence Stan Anderson had on them. And he was just in and out a short time. And the funny thing is, it almost just springs to mind that it happened the other way, Our legend was Bob Moncur, who was our legend, who was a club legend and won everything. Went down to Sunderland, signed for Sunderland from Newcastle, struggled to be accepted by people like Jim Montgomery, the goalkeeper, and the fans. But then the second season was voted the Player of the Year and captained them to winning promotion. So it can be done. Not every situation's like Lee Clark and other players never darken the door.
It's a funny old world. If you want to learn more about that second division winning side, there is a podcast with Ron McGarry. Just search on our podcast channel Really good sit down. It's about an hour long. He can talk nearly as long as Gibbo can. He's a very, very funny man. It was recorded last year. I really do recommend listening because he talks about Joe Harvey, talks about Stan Anderson, he talks about the battle that John's mentioned there between the defenders and how they didn't really like one another. And he just talks about his goal scoring exploits. It's a really good listen, if I don't say so myself. On to this next game then. Leeds United, 5-0.
Yeah.
There's a reason you picked it, and it's not a happy reason, but it's certainly a very intriguing one.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was my first Boxing Day actually reporting on Newcastle United. The first Boxing Day match reporting on Newcastle United. I'd come up from Fleet Street. I'd worked in Fleet Street and didn't think I was ever going to come back to Newcastle because quite stupidly I thought all doctors want to go to Harley Street, all journos want to go to Fleet Street. I'd made Fleet Street at a very young age. That was going to be me. And then all of a sudden, apple cart was completely turned upside down because somebody come on from the Chronicle and said, Gibbo, would you like to come back and follow Newcastle United? And I thought, would I? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Was cheeky enough to chance my arm and say, well, of course, but only if I'm allowed to cover all the World Cup finals and the Olympic Games at the same time. And I
Shy
thought,
Ben's getting out.
well, yeah, exactly. I thought they'll say, on your bike, pal. And I'd say, oh, well, okay, I'll still come. But amazingly, they said, yeah, sure, yeah, we can do that. I said, oh, right, when's the next train? I'm on my way up. And I did. That was 66. My first job was covering the World Cup, which ended up with England winning it. And I covered all the World Cups and the Olympic Games. So every 2 years I was away. But this was my first Boxing Day game, and it was at Leeds, and we lost 5-0, and we'd already lost at home to Leeds 2-1 on Christmas Eve. So it was a rotten old time. Leeds were, as I talked about, a team to behold at that time, with all the great names in it. At the time, Bobby Collins was one of the early big names of the Leeds side, and he had ran the game at St James's Park, but he was missing through injury for the return of Devon Road, and it was Billy Bremner that took. Can you imagine? You know, you're going to be without Collins, but the guy that's then going to lead the team is Billy Bremner, one of the greatest midfield dynamos, and you hate to play against him because he's got a tiger in his tank. He's in your face, he's aggressive, but you half want him on your side because I hated him at the time because he was playing for Leeds and he was playing for Scotland, and that didn't endear me, but I would have half loved him to play for Newcastle United. He was made the skipper, and Newcastle, he, Gray, Cooper, they tore Newcastle to bits, and really this established them to stay in the title race. It told me what sort of gulf there was between the Newcastle side I'd come back to follow, and this was not a good Newcastle side at the time. They'd come up with Joe, but he was then having to build his second side, having brought us up, which was a side in 69. By 68 we were qualifying for Europe, albeit only 10th, but then in a season where we were going to win a European trophy. So we were making rapid progress, but it wasn't that rapid. And ironic that Big Jack was part of that Leeds side, and he was such a Newcastle United fan and had spent all his youth on the terraces with War Kid, who was Bobby, watching Jackie Milburn play for Newcastle United, who was in the family, of course. And Jack used to tell me him and Bobby used to get the bus out of Ashington down to the Haymarket, get off the bus at the Haymarket, walk round the corner to the fish and chip shop, where they would go in, they could sit in the fish and chip shop and they would have fish and chips for lunch, walk round up to St James's Park on the popular side to watch War Jackie in wonderment play for a great Newcastle side and score all the goals. They would come out after the game, not go home, go straight across the road at the Gallagher end, and New St James's Hall was standing there at that time. The metro station is there now, which was an old boxing arena. But every Saturday night it had wrestling on, and Bobby and Jack would come out the football ground, go across, watch the wrestling, come out the wrestling about 9 o'clock, get on the last bus to Ashington, and either their mum or dad would be waiting in the bus station for them coming out and take them home. And that was two of the greatest players, certainly I think Bobby Charlton, you can say the greatest Englishman of his generation. And Jack is such an underrated centre-half. He used to say, "War Kid's the best footballer in the country and I'm the best destroyer. He can play and I'll stop other people playing." And that was him. And boy, did we see it in those days.
So when Leeds hit Newcastle for 5, what was your first thought? Goodness me, what have I done?
No, because following Newcastle is in your blood, and it doesn't matter what the result is. You talk to any Newcastle fan, they'll complain like heck that Newcastle get beat 5, but I tell you what, they'll be there the next week in the thousands. They don't desert. And I just thought we'd get better, and incredibly, I say incredibly because now this doesn't apply. I thought we'd get better, and incredibly we did.